Welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that they are living in a modern-day spiritual paradise. I'm your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, and a kid raised in Jehovah's Witnesses in the 70s and 80s, as I do. Little warning for those, depending on where you're at in your journey, Pimi, Pomo, Pomeranian, whatever it might be, as a Jehovah's Witness, we're never trying to offend anyone here. My own brand of observation, sarcasm, humor, and experience. Thanks for being here. It is great to be back behind the microphone. I enjoyed a week abroad. I hiked to the top of a mountain I have always wanted to hike. It was really, really fun. Got a little sunburned, which I was not expecting. Sat through an unbelievable, miserable set of flight delays, and now I am back. And it's funny how climbing to the top of a mountain alone gives you clarity of thought. It's what I do when I want to think. I walk, I hike, and I do it alone. But have you ever noticed that? Is anybody else like me? I don't know. I guess there's a lot to be said regarding those ancient stories of the sage that sits on the mountaintop and just spews a bunch of wisdom. You know, like the Buddha on Vulture Peak or during his final journey, if you're familiar with the Buddhist writings. Or, if that makes you uncomfortable, the equally important Moses climbing Mount Sinai, not once, but 8 times, according to Exodus 19 through 34, where he had one-on-one meetings with Jehovah, the God that ironically got pissed when man built the Tower of Babel, but then required his favorite guy at the time to climb a mountain just to talk to him. Ironic indeed, isn't it? I got nothing, but it's in the Bible, so it must be true, right? Incidentally, it starts early this week. I'm guessing our guy Moses had some serious quad muscles. Mine were burning during my hike. Nike actually should have named their company after Moses sandals because, damn, 8 times up Mount Sinai. No boots, no shoes, just some sandals. Side point, because I'm full of them this week. You can tell I've got some rest. Don't forget Moses did all of that on an empty stomach after fasting for 40 days multiple times. According to the Bible, there's that 40 days thing again. It pops up a lot in the Bible, 40, but again, it's all in the Bible, so it must be real. And so you can see what kind of mood I'm in this week as we tackle a subject that I'm excited about. And needless to say, I sometimes think about stupid things while I'm hiking. And there it is. Upon my return, I very briefly dove into what was going on in the spiritual paradise of Jehovah's Witnesses during my absence, only to discover that the Watchtower Study for March 9th through 15th of 2026 featured the second part of a 2-part study on one of my all-time favorite subjects during my time as a witness, the Book of Job, with the article being titled, How the Book of Job Can Help You When You Suffer. It's study article 49 in the February 2026 issue if you would like to go take a look at that. With a focus on learning from Job's experiences and the advice of his companions and all things Job. How exciting. As a disclaimer, I've discussed the Book of Job here before. It's a favorite, mostly because it's also a favorite, it's something we have in common, of the governing body, but also in one of the most absurd, the absolutely most absurd of all J-Dub doctrines, the belief that we have, free will. And the Book of Job explains that in detail according to those guys in New York. Please see a past episode if you're somewhat interested in more thoughts on that. But we're going to now stray into similar territory this week as we take a closer look at how the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses in 2026 use the book of Job to try to explain why people suffer, as God himself watches on from the bleacher seats. This is almost always a subject considered once a year by Jehovah's Witnesses in an effort to bolster them, you guessed it, for more suffering, more waiting on promises that aren't coming, as they continue day after day to wait for the end of overlapping generations and the end of the last day of the last days, no doubt the very last of the last days. It's all meant to get them to keep going. So if you miss going to the Watchtower Study every Sunday, like I do, sit back and enjoy as this former Watchtower Study conductor takes a look at the governing body's juvenile attempts to take a Bible book of which has no identified author. No one knows who wrote this book, and it incidentally also resembles many other ancient Eastern myths, including the Mesopotamian myth of Atrahasis, with striking similarities to discovered prayers to the Babylonian god Marduk. It even resembles Sumerian poems. It resembles an Egyptian text called The Protest of the Eloquent Peasant. And it even resembles Canaanite stories about a guy called King Keret. But we don't need to look at any of this. That's scholarly and stuff. Because Jehovah's Witnesses have the 11 guys in upstate New York, the governing body. And despite lacking anything resembling scholarship or education on ancient languages, texts, archaeology, anything, they tell us that Job was among the first Jehovah's Witnesses here on planet Earth. But incidentally, for those wondering, Job had a beard. He never went in field service, and he's never worn a necktie. He did, however, have some pretty shitty friends, just like many Jehovah's Witnesses do today. Very conditional friendships. You may have wondered why a God of love continues to watch people suffer in some of the most horrific and gruesome ways imaginable. Well, in what many feel is the oldest book in the entire Bible, we're told that the book of Job provides the answer. Just go ahead and approach and ask a Jehovah's Witness at your local book cart. They have the answers. They need something to do anyway. So what do we know about this guy Job? Can we trust him? Was he even real? You see, Jesus gave the faithful and discreet slave the green light to write about Job and cover it just last week at the all-important Watchtower Study in today's spiritual paradise. I've said enough now. Buckle up. Let's dive in. We're not going to need any microphone carriers for this one. It's our own brand of Watchtower Study. The governing body recognizes that thinking people want the answer to one of life's greatest questions. Indeed, a question that has kept the business of religion thriving for centuries. What is it? Human life is filled with injustice and with suffering. And why doesn't God fix it all? It's a very legitimate question for thinking people. Frankly, it's one that I pondered since I was old enough to grasp the concept. It was this question, along with the migraine headache-inducing question of how Jehovah had no beginning and he has no end, that kept my little boy brain spinning while I tried to fall asleep at night. Wait a minute. Jehovah has the power to stop bad but doesn't? Jehovah's been around forever? He never had a beginning or end? Yeah, too many sleepless nights as a kid who should have been thinking about riding his bike or something. But before we even dive into this book and Watchtower Study, we need to ask, was Job even a real person? Is the book of Job actually historical? Or is it just a mishmash of parables and Eastern myths? Well, leave it to the purveyors of paradise to answer the tough questions, because they have a point to prove after all, folks. And let me tell you, please, please, take a minute, listen carefully, and see if you can spot something interesting here in what the governing body says about the man Job. From the All Scripture is Inspired of God and Beneficial book, page 95, paragraph 2, we are told this, quote, Job has become synonymous with patience and endurance. But was there such a person as Job? In spite of all the efforts of the devil to remove this sterling example of integrity from the pages of history, the answer is clear. Job was an actual person. Jehovah names him along with his witnesses Noah and Daniel, whose existence was accepted by Jesus Christ. The ancient Hebrew nation regarded Job as a real person. End quote for a moment. There's my guy Noah. There's Daniel. And there's the assumptive comment that the ancient Hebrew nation regarded Job as a real person. How they know that, I'm not sure. Did they time travel? Were they part of the Hebrew nation? The answer. Back to the quote, the Christian writer James points to Job's example of endurance. Only a true life example, not a fictitious one, would carry weight, convincing worshipers of God that integrity can be maintained under all circumstances. Moreover, the intensity and feeling of the speeches recorded in Job testify to the reality of the situation. End quote. Oh, no. Oh, no. Did you spot it? Did you spot a few things in this reference from the All Scripture Inspired book? We immediately have a problem. And incidentally, it wasn't discussed at the Watchtower Study last week. They must have just missed it. But first, let's read Ezekiel chapter 14 and verse 14 from the New World Translation itself, where it says, quote, even if these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job were within it, they would be able to save only themselves because of their righteousness, declares the sovereign Lord Jehovah. End quote. Ezekiel 14:14. And there it is. Jehovah's Witnesses are told to believe that Job was a real person because he is mentioned with two other guys that are also real people. As always, my guy Noah. He of unusual sexual restraint fame, 500 years of dodging Mrs. Noah's physical needs, and also the guy that found the time to build a boat, collect the animal kingdom, and hit the national average in field service, all after 500 years old, only to watch Jehovah then drown babies and puppies anyway, leaving him to shovel mounds and mounds of animal shit out a single window, all while floating at sea. Yeah, that Noah. He was unquestionably a real person, right? So Job's in good company already. He's mentioned with Noah. But in a twist of irony, the other guy mentioned by the Bible itself is the prophet Daniel, one of the most important Jehovah's Witnesses to have ever lived. If you question that, you see, Daniel is a key figure. He's the key figure in arriving at modern-day organizational structure of Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body itself. Did you know? It's the very real prophet Daniel, just like Noah and Job, that gives all of us the key interpretations in his book at Daniel chapter 4. You remember the 2,520-year prophecy that ends in 1914, and Daniel chapter 2, where he discusses the succession of world powers and the final destruction of human governments by God's kingdom. All of that, of course, pointing to 1919, when Jesus, looking on from heaven, decided to choose Judge Joe Rutherford as his mouthpiece to mankind, and thus the modern-day governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. And so we're starting strong in our review of last week's Watchtower Study on Job. I could spend an hour, probably more, as you know. Some of you probably are so irritated at this point. But I could spend that hour talking about whether my guy Noah ever really existed. But how about the prophet Daniel? Let's get off Noah for a minute, just this week. Job was lumped in with Noah and Daniel, claiming that means he was a real person. Well, I don't know how to tell anyone listening. Scholars have long known that the book of Daniel is written by someone, quote, claiming to be Daniel, who wasn't living, possibly not living until 400 years after Daniel himself allegedly lived. We don't have the name of the person who forged Daniel. The only other actual forgery in the Old Testament, an example, a book that claims to be written by someone who did not, in fact, write the book, most books don't make any claims for their authors, is Ecclesiastes, separate subject, which claims to be written by Solomon, strongly by implicity, but it was not, as scholars know. And so the problems begin. They begin immediately. Was Job real? Well, he was as real as Noah and Daniel. Oops. Could they have picked two better people that no one believes existed or there's no proof for? Nope. But you see, no Noah, no Daniel. No Daniel, no Jehovah's Witnesses. Safe to say, my guy Noah has been linked to ancient flood myths in many cultures, and we have zero proof, none, that Daniel ever existed either, and his book itself is filled with errors that scholars have easily identified as a complete forgery. The book of Daniel is a forgery. And there it is. Putting all of that aside, which I don't encourage you to do, it's critical that Jehovah's Witnesses know that Job, he was a real guy, because so was Noah and Daniel. But if you're looking to believe anything this organization says about Jehovah watching mankind suffer, you must first believe that this guy Job and his book are real. And they just compared him in the Bible to two other men that most scholars don't believe ever existed. But Job, of the three, he was the real one. Oh no, huge problem. But let's have a Watchtower study about it anyway, right? Have I mentioned lately how much I love the 11 guys in upstate New York? Their own Bible at Ezekiel 14:14 lumps Job in with a couple of other guys no one thinks were ever real people. But don't worry. There wasn't likely a single Jehovah's Witness sitting in a Kingdom Hall last Sunday that considered any of this prior to the Watchtower study and all things Book of Job. They just sat there, just like most of us used to, let's be honest. They just sat there in an intellectual coma with their Watchtower highlighted in yellow ink and raised their hands to repeat what was said in each paragraph. That's all they did. No one concerns themselves with the facts. And so begins all things Job, and why their endless leaning on them, the crutch they use on this guy to explain so many things, is so ridiculous. The name Job itself, consider that. I mean, the name Job wouldn't offer proof as to whether he's real or not, would it? Well, let's take a look. I mean, it couldn't possibly be a myth, the name Job, right? No. It couldn't possibly be a name that was lifted and found itself in the stories of nomadic people. No. Well, consider the meaning of the man's name, Job. Would you look at that? It's most commonly translated as persecuted, tried, or afflicted, and is likely from a root suggesting to return or to repent. Some interpretations connect it to the Hebrew word for enemy, oyev, suggesting one who is subject to enmity. So, when you consider that the man Job's name itself, evidently, was given to him by his parents because I guess they knew that someday, even as they stared at him in his little baby crib, that he would then be used to explain to the universe why people suffer. So they named him Job, which means persecuted, tried, or afflicted, or enemy, subject to enmity. Look how cute he is, honey. He sure is. Let's name him Job, because I think someday he'll be an old guy and he'll be the key to why people suffer. There it is, the reasoning of the all-wise governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. And again, folks, yeah, I'm being a sarcastic ass this week, but it's just stunning how little these people know about what's being force-fed to them. And I can say that because I was one of them. Job, the book of Job, his name itself proves it was all nothing but a myth. The fact that he's named in the Bible next to two guys that everyone knows are myths, on and on it goes, and it's just the beginning. It is just the beginning of why the book of Job is ridiculous when used to try to explain why humans suffer. Okay. Let's jump into the content that was fed to Jehovah's Witnesses last week. And it adds to what really a special experience this undoubtedly was. If you would like to read the wisdom for yourself, you can find it online from the Watchtower Study edition of December 2025, study article number 48. The meeting opened with Song 129, titled, "We Will Keep Enduring," and the stage is set for Jehovah's Witnesses last Sunday. Keep enduring. We know you're tired. The article in the Watchtower is titled, "The Book of Job Can Help You When You Suffer." It then has a sentence called Focus, which says, quote, "What we learn from the book of Job about why God allows suffering and how we can endure when we suffer," end quote. And I'll mean to tell you, this article put to print and fed to J-Dubs starts strong, with the theme scripture of the Watchtower Study being a doozy. From Job, chapter 34 and verse 12 of the New World Translation, where we are told, quote, "For a certainty, God does not act wickedly," end quote. Well, wait a minute. Hold tight. Hold tight with that thought. If Job was real, and he wasn't, nor did he write his own book, he may have been in the dark on a few things, wouldn't you say? You see, Job makes this comment in Job 34:12 that Jehovah never acts wickedly a full 33 chapters after Jehovah took his seat in the front row and allowed his own bully spirit son, otherwise known as Satan the devil, do the following things to Job from Job chapter 1, verses 13 through 19, where we are told, quote, Now on the day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the cattle were plowing and the donkeys were grazing beside them when the Sabaeans attacked and took them, and they killed the servants with the sword. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Wow, what a miracle. While he was still speaking, another one came and said, fire from God, fell from the heavens and blazed among the sheep and the servants and consumed them. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Wow, a second guy miraculously escaped. God missed him with the fire. Back to the Bible, while he was still speaking, another one came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands and made a raid on the camels and took them, and they killed the servants with the sword. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. That makes 3. 3 guys were able to escape, even Jehovah's fire from heaven. Back to the Bible. While he was still speaking, yet another one came and said, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. Suddenly, a great wind from the wilderness, and it struck the 4 corners of the house so that it fell on the young people and they were killed. I am the only one who escaped to tell you, end quote. Okay, the laughter is inappropriate. I can't help it, okay? I really can't. Job and this Watchtower study, the theme was Job 34:12. For a certainty, God does not act wickedly. He says that 33 chapters after what I just read to you from Job 1. Where even God himself decided to rain fire down on people. It says it in the Bible. Not apostates. No one twisting words. Nope, right from the New World Translation. Miraculously, 4 eyewitnesses were able to escape, including one who apparently just snuck out the door of the house before the roof caved in on all the kids. And yet, the theme of this book and the theme of this Watchtower study is that Job says God never acts wickedly. Just 33 chapters after the same God allows his own punk kid, Satan, to slaughter Job's animals and children, and Jehovah even gets involved and rains fire down. You know, sort of like me letting my kid burn your house down with everyone you love inside because my same son called me a pussy. So just to prove I was in control, I let him burn your house down with everyone inside. And when that wasn't enough, I've let him burn down millions and billions of other people's homes just to prove what he was doing was bad. And I ain't no pansy after all. I'm not getting involved. He pushed a button, I'm going to let him push it. The absurdity of anyone saying this book is real and historical is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. But what's truly absurd is the comment that God, for a certainty, does not act wickedly. Job 34:12. For a Jehovah's Witness to accept this explanation of why evil is allowed and that Jehovah does nothing wicked, I encourage you to consider what even imperfect thinking human beings, who incidentally, don't forget, were made in Jehovah's image, have to say about those that sit on their hands while watching people, much less your own kid, inflict evil on other innocent persons. How about just one? I love this quote. Quote, the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. End quote. Albert Einstein. Imperfect guy. Needless to say, Job chapter 34's claim that Jehovah does nothing wicked, well, It doesn't hold up, folks, by just reading, ironically, the book of Job. You could essentially end the Watchtower study or any conversation on why Jehovah allows suffering with a simple answer. Despite having all the power to end suffering immediately, Jehovah is doing nothing about it. He's watching. When someone else asks you why you feel this way, a person can ironically answer, because I read the book of Job. It's right there. It's right in the Bible. Having the power to stop precious people from being harmed and choosing to do nothing about it because your reputation, your name means more to you than saving innocent people is indeed an odd flex. It's the kind of flex that thinking people see for what it is. It's nothing more than a massive character flaw. Massive. But again, none of this stops the governing body from feeding this stuff to Jehovah's Witnesses. Paragraph 1 of the Watchtower Study begins with this, quote, "Have you recently had the pleasure Have you recently had the pleasure of reading the book of Job? Oh, what a pleasure." Back to the quote, "Though written some 3,500 years ago, this ancient book is often counted among the masterpieces of world literature. Commenting on its simple structure, beautiful style, and expressive language, one reference work calls its writer a literary genius." Pay close attention to what comes next if you're someone who is looking at the book of Job and thinks it's real. Quote, "Moses was the man who penned this remarkable book, but the real author is Jehovah God." End quote, paragraph 1 of last week's Watchtower study. And I'm here to say, oh no. Folks, people, absolutely no one on this earth, no one knows who wrote the book of Job. No one. Jewish tradition likes to say, hey, it must have been Moses, but no one knows. And it might be time to remind everyone that according to Jewish tradition, this guy Moses also wrote the first 5 books of the Bible known as the Pentateuch. Oh, and incidentally, upon looking at the claim that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, this also means that Moses wrote about his own death at Deuteronomy 34, verses 5 through 7. How he did that from the grave, we aren't entirely sure. But we're told by traditionalists and Jehovah's Witness leadership that Moses wrote it while he was dead. And by the way, as the paragraph then shows, paragraph 1 of last week, Moses apparently also wrote the book of Job. So you can trust it. We're off to a strong start, are we not? Job is real. He answers why we suffer today. Take a look at his name. Take a look at the guys he's mentioned with. Take a look at who wrote the book. And the problems are heavy. And as usual, there is nothing to see here in paragraph 1, aside from the fact that it's a masterpiece. Okay, so on to paragraph 2 of last week, which says, quote, "The book of Job is a key part of the Bible. Why? For one thing, it clearly reveals the great issue facing all intelligent creation, the sanctification of Jehovah's name. It also teaches us about Jehovah's marvelous qualities, such as his love, wisdom, justice, and power. For example, the book of Job refers to Jehovah as the Almighty 31 times, more than the rest of the scriptures combined. The book of Job also answers many of life's questions, including one that still troubles many. Why does God allow suffering? End quote. And there it is. I'm desperately trying to stay on track, but this is one of the main reasons the governing body loves the book of Job. According to them, it sanctifies Jehovah's name. And if you haven't been really impressed by the insane facts I've already shared about all things Job up to this point, let more insanity invade. First, covered in depth in prior shows, Jehovah is not God's name. It wasn't created until the 13th century, and Yahweh was a Canaanite storm god. Those are facts. But Job as a book is so important because it sanctifies God's name, a name that came from a Canaanite storm god and was invented by men centuries later. Take the time to educate yourself on this, folks. But second, if Jehovah is so almighty, perhaps someone can explain why we need this book to begin with. The entire premise of what these guys teach Jehovah's Witnesses is so deeply flawed. It requires you to set all common sense aside and dive into a pool of cognitive dissonance that I promise will eventually drown you. It will drown you intellectually and emotionally. There is simply no way a thinking person can read the book of Job at face value and find meaningful comfort in what the God Jehovah does and even allows with the character of Job. Put simply, it defies all common sense. It defies decency. If there is any insight into why mankind suffers, it always leads back to one place. And plot twist, folks, it's not Satan. It's Jehovah. Jehovah's allowing it. I'm going to be repetitive here with my own illustration in order to explain why I make such a bold statement. And it sums up, in my opinion, the entire book of Job. It goes something like this. As a father, you move your family into a beautiful new house in a new neighborhood. One of your sons decides he wants to run the house because he doesn't like how dad runs it. He goes out into the street in front of his siblings and all the neighbors, and he starts screaming. He's calling his father names and claiming that his dad is weak and that his siblings only love him because they all got their own rooms and their own laptops. I don't know. If he didn't give everything to all of his kids, they would tell dad that he really sucked. Instead of bringing his son back into the house and punishing him for such disrespect, the father decides to let his bully son run the show because dad is apparently worried, all according to the book of Job, that his other kids will think he is weak if he doesn't let his bully son keep screaming about this out in the street every night. He doesn't want the other kids or the neighbors to think that he's soft, does he? So he agrees to let the bully son torture, maim, and even kill the other kids and neighbors just because, how did the governing body put it just a moment ago in paragraph 2? Jehovah needs to sanctify his name. Because he's the Almighty. It says so 31 times in the book of Job and stuff. Almighty? So Jehovah takes a seat on the front lawn. You've all seen the meme, what is it, Jason Momoa, where he flips the chair open to sit down and watch. You've seen it online. He takes his seat on the front lawn and watches his own bully kid brutally kill innocent people because he doesn't want anyone to think he's a pansy and stuff, whose kids only love him because they're spoiled. Dad never thinks about just dealing with this bully, rebellious son. No. He lets everyone else deal with him, including us, because he doesn't want his name and reputation ruined. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll save you any more time if you want to bail here. That is the book of Job. There it is. If you don't see all of the problems with this, I don't think I can do much to help you. If this happened to you as a human parent, would you allow a bully to kill your kids just to prove your point and that you're tough? No? You say no? But wait a minute, aren't we made in Jehovah's image and he is smarter than us? Remember, the Almighty, 31 times in Job, the Almighty. Yeah, I love when the governing body rolls out the book of Job and tries to use it to explain the massive, disturbing character flaws of their own God. But the ridiculous reasoning continues in this Watchtower study, including paragraph 6, which says this, quote, how the Israelites could have benefited. The Israelites had not lived easy lives in Egypt. For example, Joshua and Caleb had spent their youth as slaves. Then, through no fault of their own, they wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. Pay close attention to this, quote, if the Israelites knew about the story of Job's trials and the outcome of his life, no doubt it helped them, as well as the Israelites of future generations, to understand who is ultimately responsible for suffering. They could also better understand why God permits suffering and how much he values human integrity and faithfulness. End quote. I'm sorry, but damn, I love this stuff. It forces me to repeat myself a lot, but here it is. First, there is zero evidence in archaeology or in any other form that the Exodus with Israel ever even happened. Folks, there is nothing. Zero. There's zero proof of Moses. But I've always been a fan of their suppositions, where they said, quote, if the Israelites knew about Job, it no doubt helped them, end quote. Yeah, are you sure? You're wandering in the wilderness for 40 years as an Israelite. You've got no shelter. At times, as the Bible tells us, you're going without food and water. You see Moses hitting a rock, and you see manna float down from heaven, and you eat it off the ground. And how would you exactly know about Job? What? How would you know about Job? Can anyone clue me in? Oh, were the Israelites following Job on Instagram? I don't. How did they know about Job? But people, please think beyond the Watchtower. Think beyond the Watchtower for a minute. The wandering Israelites knew Job and were helped by his story to understand why they were suffering. Are you sure? You want to hang your hat on that? Because this gets awkward. Last I checked, they didn't know Job. And well, if they did, they weren't very inspired by Job's example, as stated in the Watchtower here, because, again, this is awkward. We happen to know the exact attitude of the suffering Israelites in the wilderness. Were they acting like Job? Were they inspired by him? And we get it all from that book otherwise known as the Bible. I can't help but wonder how the suffering Israelites were comforted by Job, because the Bible itself gives us 15 times that the Israelites complained, murmured, or grumbled in their time from Egypt to the Promised Land, of which many of them didn't make it. Jehovah decided to kill a few. They may have been following Job on Instagram or something, but his story wasn't doing much to inspire them while they were suffering in the wilderness. no matter what the Watchtower of last Sunday tells you. I don't think they were getting inspired by Job. Despite what last Sunday's Watchtower Study says, the Bible tells us that the Israelites didn't dig suffering. They complained about bitter water. They complained about lack of food. They complained about being thirsty. They complained about Moses and Aaron themselves. And at one point, they even begged to go back to Egyptian slavery over following Job's inspiring example. I don't think the writing committee sits down and thinks very much, folks. I'm sorry, I'm having too much fun here. But even more bizarre than this in paragraph 6 of the study is not only did they not know Job, but they bitched so much that Jehovah, true to form as he does, then made them wander for 40 years and started killing them. Yeah, I mean, paragraph 6 says if they had known Job, they were no doubt inspired by him, but it isn't hard to see they didn't know him and they weren't inspired by him, because Jehovah, at the end, started killing a lot of them. You remember, at one point he opened the earth and swallowed people. At another point, he sent poisonous snakes to bite them. You remember that one. It was weird. The God that commanded that his people have no idols then had Moses make an idol, a copper snake, so if they looked at it, they wouldn't die. And then hell, he even taunted Moses by taking him to a mountaintop to show him what he was going to miss out on, the promised land. And then he killed Moses. Yeah, right there on the mountaintop. What? You say what? Yeah. And if you don't believe any of this, if you don't believe the Israelites were no doubt inspired by a guy they didn't know, take just one example from the Bible itself, Numbers 16, 49 through 50 of the New World Translation, which says, quote, "But those who died by the plague were 14,700 in number." Jehovah likes even numbers, does he not? Besides those who died on account of Korah. Then Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting, for the plague had been brought to a halt. End quote. There it is. All of that said, according to the Watchtower in paragraph 6 of last Sunday, the suffering Israelites were no doubt comforted by Job's example. We don't know how. We don't even know how they knew he existed. But it made it all more palatable as they wandered in the wilderness, died of plagues, serpents, opening earth holes, and all sorts of stuff. I guess. I don't know. I'm just, the governing body said it. It must be true. Needless to say, this former Watchtower Study conductor, this guy, doesn't believe that the suffering Israelites knew about a guy named Job. And if they did, they missed the point of this masterpiece. Because, well, Jehovah was killing them pretty often out there. He just decided to kill a lot of them. And he only let Job be tortured and stuff. Yeah, so there was that. But let's move on to why this Watchtower article was put to print and shoved down the throats of Jehovah's Witnesses last Sunday. Jehovah's Witnesses are suffering in 2026. And the governing body knows it. That is why they can now grow hair on their body. They can leave the skirts and the neckties at home, and they no longer need to knock on doors for 10 hours a month. They can even give a toast now. Elders can be 21. Ministerial servants can be 18. They can say hi to a shunned person. Oh my. The governing body knows Jehovah's Witnesses are suffering. They know it. So let's throw them a few bones, as I just mentioned, and also remind them all why it's okay to suffer. Let's roll out our annual discussion on the book of Job. So on to paragraph 8, which says this, quote, "We, however, have learned from the account in the book of Job that God is not responsible for suffering. Satan is. We have also learned not to assume that those who suffer are reaping what they have sown. The scriptures tell us that time and unexpected events can affect anyone at any time. And we have learned that by our enduring trials faithfully, we give Jehovah a reply to Satan's taunts. That helps to defend his reputation. We do not take what we have learned for granted. These insights enable us to know the truth about why we and our loved ones suffer. End quote, paragraph 8. And seeing it in print just makes it even more surreal. A father putting his reputation over the safety and well-being of his children. It's right there in paragraph 8 of the December 2025 Watchtower. Only it's couched in a really positive light, like it's a good thing. And the book of Job certainly gives us insight into Jehovah himself, does it not? His son Satan is disrespecting him, so he allows him to harm the rest of us rather than putting his reputation on the line. I mean, my God, people, do you know a single human father that would do any of this? As an example that pops into my head, even prison inmates think about their kids first, as we see by what happens to those that enter the prison on the crimes of hurting children. They don't last long. But the governing body is here teaching Jehovah's Witnesses with an old ancient book with mishmash stories that Jehovah himself will not do the same. Even as mankind continues to suffer in unthinkable ways. And all they have to do is point at the book of Job as proof of what a wonderful thing it is. Isn't it wonderful? At no point do the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses teach that this is a massive character flaw by a father that is watching his children be killed. This paragraph even says it's all Satan's fault. Yeah, it's Satan's fault. Even as it was Jehovah that saw what Satan was doing from the beginning. You remember in the Garden of Eden. And he just let him continue on hurting his kids. And then there is this that you must consider in the light of the book of Job. From Jehovah's own book, the Bible, at James 4 and verse 17 of the New World Translation, we are told, quote, "Therefore, if someone knows how to do what is right and yet does not do it, it is a sin for him." End quote. Who wants to tell the governing body they've got a problem? Oh, wait, the leaders of this organization already know it's a sin. If you have the power to stop something bad or evil from happening and you don't do it. They know that this is evil. From the Watchtower of September 15th, 1996, page 17, paragraph 5 says, quote, "The deeper our scriptural knowledge is, the better is the foundation for our faith. At the same time, our accountability to God becomes greater. James 4:17 says, if one knows how to do what is right and yet does not do it, it is a sin for him. But James' words can also apply to sins of omission. In Jesus' parable of the sheep and the goats, for instance, the goats are condemned not for bad acts, but for not helping Christ's brothers. End quote. And to that I say, wait a minute, do you mean like Jehovah with Job? How about Jehovah with the rest of us, with the rest of mankind? It's a sin if you don't help people and you have the power to help them. It's a sin of omission. You simply can't make it up. All things pulled directly from the book of Job are either ignored or manipulated to support the idea that a Jehovah's Witness should continue to suffer with a big old smile on their face. even as they are loyal to an organization that caused them to maybe miss out on marriage or having a family, or is requiring them to shun a loved one, or is even encouraging a victim of abuse to wait on Jehovah and not tell anyone. Or even tragically, if they've even lost someone that needed a pint of blood to keep living and they refused. And while Jehovah's Witnesses in the governing body and this very study blames Satan, the boogeyman, it takes nothing to see that it is actually the, what did they say 31 times in the book of Job? The Almighty Jehovah that is allowing all of this to happen to his kids because of his reputation and stuff. Because it's understandable why the creator of all things, the Almighty, is then very concerned what other creations he's made think of him. If he just leans down and bitch slaps the bully, he's concerned what they'll think of him. That's it. That's the book. Paragraph 10 of this study features comments about Job questioning Jehovah and dealing with his crappy friends. All things a Jehovah's Witness can relate to, by the way. Friendships are very conditional in that organization. But then the Watchtower writers throw in this, quote, "Of course, Job was wrong to demand a direct answer from God as to what was behind his suffering," end quote. Oh, and I snorted and shot a sip of coffee out my nose. It's sentences like that that make you wonder if they read their own Bible or their own literature. They just said it was wrong for Job to wonder why he was suffering. Real? Huh? How about this? From the article, Should We Question God? In the 2012 Watchtower of November 1st, page 3, paragraphs 1 and 2, the governing body said this about questioning Jehovah, quote, "Some say that it is wrong to question God." Yeah, you just did in last Sunday's Watchtower study. Job was a bad guy. Nope. Okay, back to this one. Quote, "They may feel that it is disrespectful to ask why God does or does not allow certain things to happen. Is that your view? If so, you may be surprised to learn that many good people have questioned God. Note the following examples of questions they have asked him. It includes Jesus, Habakkuk, and would you look at that? Our guy Job, questioning Jehovah personally. And then the reference in this 2012 Watchtower says, quote, "If you read the passages surrounding those quotations, you will see no indication that Jehovah God was offended when asked such sincere questions. Really, his tolerance is not surprising. For instance, God is not insulted when we ask him to satisfy basic physical needs that keep our bodies healthy. He gladly fills those requests. Likewise, he willingly supplies information that can keep us mentally and emotionally healthy." End quote. That might be one of my all-time favorite quotes. Jehovah supplies information that keeps us mentally and emotionally healthy. Oh, we're going to come back to that in the future. Noted. But in this reference, last Sunday, Job was wrong to ask God why he was suffering. From the 2012 Watchtower, Job is held up as an example of someone who asked God why he was suffering, and it was a good thing Jehovah was willing to answer. They are slipping. I mean, it is just getting so bad and obvious that they don't understand their own religion. Then his question to a God whose name he didn't even know was apparently in bad taste. That's what they insinuate. Remember, Jehovah, the name wasn't around, folks. It wasn't around. Neither was Yahweh. Apparently all of those types of questions were in bad taste and we shouldn't ask them unless you read the 2012 Watchtower, which it says, yeah, feel free to ask them. But, which one do we believe? Doesn't know. Doesn't matter. Was it bad of Job to ask why a windstorm killed all his kids? Or all of his animals were killed? Or Jehovah himself rained fire down from heaven on his animals? Or Jehovah gave him a disease that had him scraping open sores with broken pottery? According to this Watchtower paragraph, Job was just wrong to even ask questions. Just don't read other Watchtowers that says it was a good idea. So I guess when cross-referenced with the 2012 Watchtower, Job's questions didn't qualify as information that the governing body said, quote, would keep him mentally and emotionally healthy. These guys are exhausting. They're exhausting. It's incredible. Okay, getting long-winded. Paragraph 13 tells us the following, quote, how can we benefit? As Christians, we too need endurance. For example, some of us are coping with a physical or emotional problem, a difficult family situation, the loss of a loved one, or some other serious problem, and at times, the comments or the actions of others may make our situation harder to endure. However, the book of Job teaches us that we can express our innermost feelings to Jehovah, confident that he will hear us. End quote for a moment. Paragraph 13. Folks, paragraph 10, just 3 paragraphs earlier said, quote, of course, Job was wrong to demand a direct answer from God as to what was behind his suffering. Paragraph 13. It's okay to ask Jehovah. It's just incredible. Okay, back to the quote. However, the book of Job teaches us that we can express our innermost feelings to Jehovah, confident that he will hear us. Okay, don't read paragraph 10. It continues, he will not condemn us if our heartfelt supplications occasionally veer into the realm of wild talk, as occurred with Job. Rather, God will give us the strength and wisdom we need to endure. He may also correct us to the extent needed, as did Job. The book of Job also teaches us how to endure if we receive counsel or discipline from Jehovah's Word, his organization, or mature friends. Just as Job benefited from humbly accepting the correction he received, we benefit when we allow ourselves to be readjusted. What beneficial lessons we learn from Job, end quote. Paragraph 13. And in reality, anyone who's been a witness for any amount of time knows that those are the messages the governing body wants to emphasize using this ancient book of Job. They know for a fact that dubs are suffering in one way or another, even at the hands of the organization itself. But remember Job? Wasn't he a good guy? Be like him. And don't question us either. Paragraph 14 sums up the intellectual insults in a fine way by encouraging Jehovah's Witnesses to not only believe that this Job story is real, but to share it with others that aren't witnesses when it says, quote, have you ever met someone in the ministry who asked you why suffering exists? How did you answer his question? You may have pointed to what the Bible says happened in the Garden of Eden. Perhaps you started by mentioning that Satan, a wicked spirit, told the first human couple a lie that led them to rebel against God. Then you may have pointed out that after Adam and Eve's rebellion, the world became filled with suffering and death. Finally, you may have explained that God is allowing enough time to pass to disprove Satan's lie and to spread the good news that in the future humans will again be perfect. This is a fine way to reason on the question, and it can lead to good results, end quote. Well, I disagree. What a magnificently loaded and ignorant paragraph. If you're having trouble believing this whole Job story after all that I presented in this last hour or so, then allow them, the governing body, to take you back to the beginning of all of this. You remember the Garden of Eden, a couple of naked people, where we are all reminded of 2 nudes and a talking snake. Oh, the very first look into Jehovah himself taking it all in from his front row seat and doing nothing about it. Never mind that he could have ended it all right then and there. He, or so we are told, was even then worried about what all his other kids would think if he stopped the nonsense. his own angels, his own creations. He's the Almighty. Fantastic. Let's go back to the Garden of Eden then for a moment. But put that all aside, because the governing body once again seems to be missing a few things. How about a couple that I can list off the top of my head based on their comments that I just read from paragraph 14? Consider this. They mention in that paragraph, after Adam and Eve's rebellion, that the world became filled with suffering and death. And wasn't this where my guy Noah comes in? Isn't that, huh? Jehovah regretted his own creations. Remember, just a few years later, again, a disaster he could have handled and eliminated right then and there, but then decided to do so in his own special way by killing everyone, including babies and puppies, flooding the earth, and then just starting over. Sounds like a great plan, right? He kind of hit the reset button like you do on a video game. But, folks, this is awkward. But Jehovah, the Almighty, his solution didn't work too well, proving he really isn't the best at coming up with backup plans. Because man went right back to being bad again. Even Noah got off the ark, got hammered, and got naked. Now we're all waiting for the governing body to show up in heaven and kill all the rest of us yet again. It's just going to keep doing this. I wonder if it'll work this time. But how about this? If we're talking about the book of Job in this Watchtower study, and then again, did the conversation in heaven between Jehovah and Satan happen? I mean, this Watchtower study claimed earlier that the Israelites may have known Job. Maybe they saw him on TikTok. I don't know. That he was a contemporary to their 40-year camping trip in the wilderness. So, well, hot damn, this is awkward. You mean to tell us that Jehovah ignored it all in the Garden of Eden, then decided to fix it all by drowning everyone during my guy Noah's day, only to have Satan hanging out the entire time and then openly talking shit to him again during the time of Israel by pointing at this guy Job and getting Jehovah to gamble it all again? We got Adam and Eve, we got Noah. How many times does he get to do this? What exactly had been going on from the Garden of Eden and then during the flood that didn't convince Jehovah's other kids that he was right all along, that allowed them all to witness the bully Jehovah himself into this challenge with Job in later years? Are you following me here? How many shots does Satan get at this? And if you're not, there is a footnote in this Watchtower study that states the following. Look for it on the first page. Quote, Job evidently lived in the time period between the death of faithful Joseph and the appointment of Moses as Israel's leader. It is likely the conversations between Jehovah and Satan and the trials Job faced took place during this time. End quote. Not the brightest bunch, guys. They're not. For a Jehovah's Witness listening, you're handing your lives over to guys that write this stuff. And in summary, this means that Jehovah looked the other way in the garden. In order to correct things, Jehovah then slaughtered all of mankind except my favorite guy Noah and his family so he could get a fresh start. Very almighty indeed, right? Just kill everybody? Okay. Failed plans need backup plans. Odd for an almighty God. But then, after all of this, he was still taking crap from his own kid and agreed to let Satan torture our guy Job because the angels and even Jesus, who were watching on still after a flood, after the garden, still weren't convinced that Satan was wrong? You've got to be kidding me. Or was it that Satan was kind of onto something about Jehovah and this whole free will thingy? I'll let you decide. But if you're not absolutely roaring with laughter at how ridiculous this all is, just think Jehovah's Witnesses are out there today, still teaching people that the book of Job explains why we're all still suffering. It seems Jehovah has not been able to convince the other angels, nor us lowly humans, that Satan is wrong about all of this. Even though he drowned all of mankind, even though Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden and had to wear clothes, had to eat meat for the first time. That was Noah. So onward we go. Onward we go, without question, speeding toward another genocide because his first one with my guy Noah didn't work out so well. In the meantime, sorry you're suffering out there. Have you met my guy Job and read his book? It explains all of this. And folks, I give you the book of Job. The Watchtower Study article concludes with this paragraph, quote, "Clearly, God's word has tremendous power to help people, including those who suffer. How grateful we are that Jehovah included the account of Job in his inspired word. The book of Job assures us that for a certainty, God does not act wickedly. It also teaches us why God permits suffering and how we can endure it. And it helps us to console those who suffer." End quote. And with all the facts and reasonings I've shared today, what's the word they used in that paragraph? Clearly. Yes, clearly it does. But I have to admit, I struggled as a Jehovah's Witness, and I continue to struggle today to use the book of Job to show others why a God of love permits suffering. And frankly, I have an even harder time using the book of Job at Job 34:12, apparently, to show that the God of the Old Testament doesn't act wickedly. Are you sure? But if you're a JW apologist or someone else that believes all of this, that it's factual, that Job is real, that he's historical, I would like you to hand over your kids to a bully so he can beat them up while you just stand there and watch. Because after all, your reputation as a father and a tough guy are at stake. And we can't have your name looking bad, right? In the context of explaining why man suffers, the book of Job is yet another installment of stories leveraged by Jehovah's Witnesses to explain something they have no answers to. It's a lie. But in my opinion, the proof is in the pudding. It didn't take much for me to share a lot of interesting facts with you about the book of Job today. But do you know how the book of Job ends? Have you contemplated it at all? After Jehovah and Satan uses God's human kids as chess pieces, proving that Satan knows exactly how to push Jehovah's buttons, Jehovah does this for Job. In Job 42, 10 through 13 and 15 of the New World Translation, the Bible tells us, quote, "After Job had prayed for his companions, Jehovah removed Job's tribulation and restored his prosperity. Jehovah gave him double what he had before. All his brothers and sisters and all his former friends came to him and ate a meal with him in his house. They sympathized with him and comforted him over all the calamity that Jehovah had allowed to come upon him. Each of them gave him a piece of money and a gold ring. So Jehovah blessed the last part of Job's life more than the beginning. And Job came to have 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 pairs of cattle, and 1,000 female donkeys. He also came to have 7 more sons and 3 more daughters. No women in all the land were as beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father gave them an inheritance along with their brothers. End quote. Ah, yes. The book of Job. Jehovah loves to work very succinctly. Even numbers don't lie, right? Even numbers. Job got exactly 14,000 sheep. Not 14,052 sheep, but 14,000 exactly. By playing along, the man Job got double what he had before. If you play Jehovah's game with his bully son Satan, it always works out. Isn't that awesome? Not as awesome for maybe his original kids who were killed when the house caved in on them and will undoubtedly be resurrected to a JW paradise where they will live single forever, eating blueberries and petting tigers. Maybe not as good for those folks. And of course, imagine being one of the original daughters who got killed when the roof caved in on her, only to find out that your replacement sisters were a lot hotter than you, and Dad gave them more money. This definitely wasn't a book written by human males, excuse me. Couldn't have been a book written by men. No way. The women are hot. They get the exact number of cattle. Everybody's happy at the end. Oh, God. Ah, yes. Jehovah's Witnesses and the Book of Job. It's available to you in the December 2025 Watchtower and studied by the Dubs last Sunday. And in my opinion, this book is pure gold. But back to the theme scripture, found in Job 34:12 of the New World Translation, which says, quote, "For a certainty, God does not act wickedly," end quote. Is that so? As is always the case, read the book of Job. I'll let you be the judge. Thank you for joining me this week. Wherever you may be, be well.